I'll skip the introductions, hoping that most of you were in the last shiur, in the last session. Only the technical parts. I'm putting you all on mute, but you are invited and expected to open your microphone anytime, even when I'm in the middle of my lecture. Stop me for questions, for anything you would like to add. I'm counting on it. And okay, so today we'll continue to talk about Rav Shagar's Elul, about the way he translates, the way he uses, appropriates the religious language of Elul, the concepts that are relevant for these days. And we'll show this translation, how this translation takes place when Rav Shagar is reading hilchot teshuva in the Mishnah Torah, in the Rambam. Specifically, we're speaking about chapter 3 and the 4 first hilchot in chapter 3 of hilchot teshuva. Rav Shagar wrote another essay about chapter 2 of hilchot teshuva. Maybe we'll learn it in the next session. I'm not sure yet where we're going to. But this is actually a chapter in the book Shuv Nafshi, which speaks about different attitudes for teshuva. There are 2 chapters on the Rambam there. This is the second one. The first one talks about teshuva according to the Rambam generally. This one is a close reading of the first hilchot in chapter 3 of hilchot teshuva. And why does Rav Shagar turn to the Rambam? First of all, Rav Shagar has a very close relation to the Rambam in many aspects. I think generally we can say that he sees the Rambam as maybe the leading figure when we're thinking about contradictions and tensions between maybe the religious traditions, the religious language that we inherited, and the way we see the world realistically, philosophically. Of course, we are maybe experiencing different problems than the Rambam did in his time. But Rambam is thinking one of the most, maybe he created the most complicated and maybe sensitive way to deal with these contradictions. So Rav Shagar is trying to appropriate what the Rambam did in his context against the Aristotelian philosophy and the problems of his time to the Nevuchim of our time. Generally, he does this a lot when he speaks about the history of halacha. And also specifically in this chapter, what we will see is he tries to see how the Rambam uses religious language, how he uses it with the tension between the way he speaks in Mishneh Torah and in Moed Nevuchim. These are all very known questions in the study of the Rambam in the Yeshivot and also in the academia. And Rav Shagar is giving, in many places, he gives his opinion on how should we read the Rambam, what is the religious sensitivities that the Rambam is expressing in his writings. And I think in the context of this shiurim, that like in many other occasions, when the Rav Shagar is speaking about one of the figures that he looks up to, he's also speaking about himself. The way we saw in the last shiur that he speaks about Rabbi Nachman, how Rabbi Nachman is translating the Torah. So I think what he says about the Rambam in this essay is what Rav Shagar is doing himself without saying in other places, like in the drasha that we saw last week. So this kind of writing of Rav Shagar when he writes about somebody else, I think it makes him, gives us an opportunity to see, gives him an opportunity to express more explicitly his opinions and the way he does, because he's speaking about somebody else, but we can learn about himself. So this is the introduction. Generally, what we'll be doing, there is a complex thing here because Rav Shagar is reading Rambam, and the chapter that we're talking about in Shuv Nafshi is very long and complicated, and he has the Rambam inside him. So what I will try to do is to read the halachot which Rav Shagar discusses in, and to interpret them following Rav Shagar. We'll see in the text, you'll see it in the page that I sent you, and I'll share the screen in a minute. There is more Rambams than Rav Shagar. So we'll read the Rambam, and I will try to present Rav Shagar's reading of the Rambam using specific passages from his article, from his essay. And of course, we are less interested in the question if this is an appropriate reading of the Rambam. We'll put that in this aside, although it might be interesting. We want to see how Rav Shagar is reading. This is the source for us. Okay, so enough of the introductions. We'll go in, unless somebody wants to stop us before we start with questions about this opening. Okay, so let's go. So I will share the screen with you. I brought you Mishneh Torah in Hebrew and in English translation from Sefaria, I hope it's good, I'm not sure. So we have every halacha in Hebrew and in English following. I will read the Hebrew, and you can look at whatever you want. I won't read everything, just a little skipping. So, משנה תורה הלכות תשובה, פרק ג', הלכה א', כל אחד ואחד מבני האדם יש לו זכויות ועוונות. מי שזכויותיו יתרות על עוונותיו צדיק, מי שעוונותיו יתרות על זכויותיו רשע, מחצה למחצה בינוני, וכן המדינה, וכן כל העולם כולו. אוקיי. הלכה ב', אדם שעוונותיו מרובים על זכויותיו, מיד הוא מת ברשעו, וכן מדינה, וכן כל העולם כולו, ושיקול זה אינו לפי מעניין הזכויות והעוונות, אלא לפי גודלם. יש זכות שהיא כנגד כמה עוונות, ויש עוון שהוא כנגד כמה זכויות. I'm skipping the verses that Rav Shagar, that Rambam is quoting here. ואין שוקלים עליה בדעתו של אל דעות, והוא היודע איך עורכים הזכויות כנגד העוונות. אוקיי, so הלכה ג' I'll read it in skipping. כל מי שניחם על מצוות שעשה ותהה על הזכויות, הרי זה איבד את כולם, ואין מזכירים לו שום זכות בעולם. כשם ששוקלים זכויות אדם ועוונותיו בשעת מיתתו, כך בכל שנה ושנה שוקלים עוונות כל אחד ואחד מבאי העולם עם זכויותיו, ביום טוב של ראש השנה. מי שנמצא צדיק נחתם לחיים, מי שנמצא רשע נחתם למיתה. והבינוני תולים אותו עד יום הכיפורים, אם עשה תשובה נחתם לחיים, אם לאו נחתם למיתה. זה last הלכה, הלכה ד', אף על פי שתקיעת שופר בראש השנה גזירת הכתוב, we saw that last week in Reb Tzadok's דרשה, רמז יש בו. כלומר, אורו ישנים משנתכם ונרדמים, הקיצו מתרדמתכם, וחפשו במעשיכם, וחזרו בתשובה וזכרו בוראכם. אלו השוכחים את האמת באבלי הזמן, ושוגים כל שנתם באבל וריק אשר לא יעיל ולא יציל. הביטו לנפשותיכם והיטיבו דרככם ומעלליכם, ויעזוב כל אחד מכם דרכו הרעה ומחשבתו אשר לא טובה. לפיכך, צריך כל אדם שיראה עצמו כל השנה כולה, כאילו חציו זכאי וחציו חייב, וכן כל העולם חציו זכאי וחציו חייב. חטא חטא אחד, הרי הכריע את עצמו ואת כל העולם כולו לכף חובה וגרם לו השחתה. עשה מצווה אחת, הרי הכריע את עצמו ואת כל העולם כולו לכף זכות, וגרם לו ולהם תשועה והצלה. מפני עניין זה נהגו כל בית ישראל להרבות בצדקה ומעשים טובים, ולעסוק במצוות מראש השנה עד יום הכיפורים, יותר מכל השנה, סליחות וכו'. So I hope you could follow it, although it's in Hebrew, you have the English translation, as I said. Generally, what we can see here is, I think, descriptions that we know from the Gemara, from other places. I think most of us have heard of them. The description of the judgment as some kind of arithmetic. How many sins do you have? How many mitzvot do you have? If you have more mitzvot, then you're a tzaddik and you live. If you have more sins, then you're a rasha and you die. This is the picture, that maybe the basic picture that we know about what happens in Rosh HaShanah, in Yom Kippur, the Benunim, which have the time from Rosh HaShanah until Yom Kippur to do teshuva. Rambam adds here specific things. In Rav Shagar's essay, he's reading this very carefully and he looks for the sources of everything the Rambam said and how he interprets them. We'll not go into the detail. But the general picture here is a description of the judgment in a specific way that we'll see in a minute. Also, there is the comment about someone who regrets the mitzvot that he did, that he will not have any merit from them. And there is the comparison of the judgment in Rosh HaShanah to the judgment that person goes after he dies. This is in Halacha Gimel, we'll speak about it in a minute. In Halacha Daled, we have some kind of maybe a sermon when Rambam is trying to awaken us when he gives us a drasha on the shofar, which is like a waking up call for anybody who is sleeping his days, passing his time without any awareness of what he is doing. So this is what, and he says, לפיכך צריך כל אדם שיראה עצמו כל השנה כולה. This kind of awareness should be with us all the year. Specifically in Rosh HaShanah, Yom Kippurim, this is the time when we maybe should put another effort in awakening us from the slumber of the rest of the year. This is a general picture. The Rambam proceeds to more details about the judgment in these days. Specifically, this chapter 3 in hilchot teshuva is speaking about the judgment and Rosh HaShanah. Okay, so this is the general picture. Now, we go following Rav Shagar into the details that he marks for us. And what I would like to show, Rav Shagar is talking about three kinds of questions of, maybe we can say that Rambam is speaking in two voices in this halachot. And generally, part of the introduction, maybe Rambam is known for speaking in two different voices. Usually the question is, what is the relation between what he said in Moreh Nevuchim and what he says in Mishneh Torah? Rav Shagar likes to show that even in Mishneh Torah, Rav Shagar, the Rambam's complexes are embedded in his halachot, in the way he reads what Chazal is saying, in the way he builds a conception of a specific halachic subject. So in this similarly, what seems to be a simple text of Shagar, it sees three kinds of contradictions, of maybe tensions. The first is between the description of the judgment and some kind of specific calculations of averot and mitzvot, like we see in Halacha Aleph. כל אחד ואדם יש לו זכויות והבנות, מי שזכויותיו יתרות. Here's Rambam described following Chazal that averot and mitzvot are something that we can count. But later on in Halacha Bet, in the end of Halacha Bet, he says, ואין שוקלים אלא בדעתו של אל דעות. והוא היודע איך עורכים הזכויות כנגד העוונות. This little comment in the end of the Halacha suddenly, I think, turns everything upside down, because if you read Halacha Aleph simply, and specifically the התחלה והלכה ב', אדם שעוונותיו מרובים על זכויותיו מיד הוא מת בראשו. So we have a picture of how divine justice works. If you are Rasha, if you have more sins than mitzvot, then you're dead. You're sentenced to death and you die. Miyad, immediately you're dead. But in the end of the Halacha, Rambam throws a little comment that says, don't think that you can understand how this calculation works. Because only El Deot in the translation here, it says, these are not weighed by anyone save only in the knowledge of the all-knowing God. Meaning there is a judgment, there is a specific judgment, and there is a verdict, but you can't know. Are you tzaddik? Are you rasha? How are these averot calculated? How much does this avera count comparing to a specific mitzvah? So we have maybe a tension or even a contradiction between a description of the divine judgment in human terms. Because if you read Halacha Aleph, Halacha Bet, without this comment in the end of Halacha Bet, you might think about it very simply, that you can count your averot and your mitzvot. There are many Hasidic tales about people who have this kind of accounting of their averot and mitzvot. There are even in Tnuat Musar, sometimes it's kind of hora'ah to do that, to count your averot, to count your mitzvot, to put them in a little tavlaot, tables. But Rambam puts this picture aside with the comment that turns everything to something much more. Rav Shagar uses the word agnostic. We'll read his description in a minute. Like kind of a philosophic negation. You can't really understand how divine judgment works. Now, what is the meaning of this contradiction? First, I think we can say that the picture that everyone who has more averot and mitzvot immediately sentenced to death, first of all, I think it's not convincing. This is not how the world works, and it's not the Epicurus and me who says that. We have also the Ravid here in his Asagot on this halacha. I put it here in the footnote. The Ravid says, לא כמו שהוא סובר, כשאמרו רשעים נחתמים לאלתר למיתה, שמיד מתים. The evil people do not immediately die because they're sentenced to death. ואינו כן, כי יש רשעים חיים הרבה. We don't see that happening. We see people who are definitely evil, the way we understand it, but they're still alive. אלא נחתמים לאלתר שלא ימלאו ימיהם שני הדור שנגזרו עליו. So first Ravid says this is not the authentic description of how the world works. And his explanation is to say that people are not sentenced to death immediately, but you can be sure that they won't live the years that they are supposed to live. So they're the plan, what they were planned to live is now cut short. But you can't say, like the Rambam says, simply that people, Adam שעוונותיו מרובים על זכויותיו, מיד הוא מת בראשו. So first of all, this picture is not convincing. Also, I think we can add that maybe this picture is not very tempting. Maybe we wouldn't want that the world will be so simply, that the world will be working in such that the divine justice will work in such an objective and simplistic way. Rav Shagar used the word anthropomorphic. There's something that maybe puts the religious language in a too simple place, too human place, if you understand it in this way. And what this last sentence, this last comment, "En shuklim alav da'ato shel el," what it does, I think it frees us, first of all, it frees us to accept the chaotic and arbitrariness of reality when we don't see people who are evil, who are immediately sentenced to death. So we can accept this reality the way it is. And also, I think maybe it even makes the divine judgment something more complicated, more deep, more mysterious. And sometimes I think this is what we're looking for. We're not looking for an accounting of mitzvot and averot. We want to see something which is more deep and more complicated, even if we're paying the price of not understanding how this justice is applied in our world. And I want to bring what Rav Shagar, the way Rav Shagar puts this. I will move between the Rambam and the paragraph from Rav Shagar that I put under him. And in this chapter, in Shuvin of Shir, the Rav Shagar writes here, this time we have only the Hebrew, so I'll try to paraphrase it in English afterwards. מהו אופיו וטיבו של הדין האלוקי? האם ניתן להבינו? האם ניתן למלא את מושג הצדק האלוקי בתוכן אנושי כלשהו? בסופו של חשבון, האם יש, ואם כן, מהי המשמעות של האמונה בצדק האלוקי, בזמן שאנו יודעים שכל מובן של צדק שלנו אינו מובן אנושי? Meaning, Rav Shagar asks, and this he has a long introduction in his essay about this, can we understand divine justice? If we believe, we say, El emunah ve'en avel tzadik ve'yashar, we believe that Kadosh Baruch Hu is just, but we don't see that in the world. So what is the meaning of believing that there is justice if we can't understand this justice? Is there a meaning for this faith in divine justice? And what he touches here, not just that we don't see it happening, maybe we don't want it to be too human, maybe we want it to be bigger than our understanding. In other places, it brings Rabbi Nachman as a figure who looks for the contradictions and the injustice in the world because it takes him out of his boundaries. And here he says in second paragraph, הדעות נחלקו. יש דווקא חוויית הידיעה וראיית הצדק האלוקי הנפעמת בהם. ויש אגנוסטים, הנפעמים דווקא מתוך אי הידיעה של ההנהגה האלוקית. לשיטתם, אינסופיותו יתברך מתעצמת דווקא מכוח אי הידיעה, שאינה כפופה לנמיכות הדעת האנושית. כל עמדה אחרת תהיה הגשמת האל. לדעתם, המאמץ לעצמו השקפה אחרת, מסכן את תמימותו ביחס לצדק האלוקי, ועלול לאבד את האמון בצדק המוחלט. So, I think Rav Shagar sees here two different, maybe religious sensitivities or two different religious experiences. There are those who are looking for justice, who need what faith does for them is it promises order, it promises justice, it promises that sometime there will be, people will get what they deserve, if not in our world, then in the next world. And this is one kind of religious experience where faith gives you safety, gives you a promise of an order, of a place where everything will be the way it should be. And there are others, I think Rav Shagar is more interested in this second opinion or worldview, religious worldview. There are others who are looking for, we're not looking for order, not looking for an understand, a world that we can understand and identify with. They're looking for something that will take them out of their place, that will, something transcendent, something that maybe instead of justice, they're looking for infinity. And the infinity is where we don't understand, or in the places where you don't understand fully why is the world, why is Hashem acting the way he is? Why is the world running the way he is? And this is some kind of religious search that Rav Shagar is very interested in other places. And as I mentioned, Rabbi Nachman is maybe the central figure for this kind of religiosity, although he has other places. There's one place in Likutei Moharan, I don't remember in which Torah, Rabbi Nachman says that we should ask Hashem, the verse is interpreting, I can't remember exactly. I think he's talking about Pasuk v'natan Hashem lecha rachamim v'richemcha. And v'natan Hashem lecha rachamim, Hashem will give you the mercy, he interprets it that Hashem will give us the mercy, meaning that his mercy will be a mercy that we can understand. That we are asking Hashem, we know that you are feeling mercy for us, but we want to have a human mercy, not a divine mercy, because a divine mercy, we can understand it. Sometimes we just want Hashem to do something that we believe, it's something that we can understand. And sometimes we're looking for something that will take us out of our limits. So the question here, as Rav Shagar puts it, in the Rambam, we can see in one hand, a description which is very human, very understandable. There is a calculation of averot and mitzvot, and there is justice, and everybody will get what he deserves. And in the other side, we have this en shoklim elav. You can't really understand what is justice, what is averah, what is mitzvah, how does it count, and why does somebody live the way he is. You can't even say what the Avid is saying, that I see evil people alive, because you can't know who is evil and who is tzaddik, and specifically you can't know if you are Rasha or tzaddik. This is, I think, maybe the most troubling thing. But in a way, what Rav Shagar is trying to show us is that there is something interesting and maybe more complex and more deep in this kind of view. So this is the first question, which is, maybe we'll call it simple judgment and complicated judgment. Maybe this become kind of title we can put. So first question or first contradiction. I'm reminding you that you are invited to stop me at any time for questions or comments or whatever. Okay, so the second one, yes.
When we speak about complicated judgment, you say, I mean, moving into the infinite, when you lose any idea of concepts, then what do you have? I mean, it's sort of like, you're obviously using human judgments and say, well, it's complicated judgment. Does that mean that you'll say, well, we have multiple factors over here, it's not so simple, and we could use a multiple analysis of something, or you're just saying that we have no concepts, and then I'm not sure what you're doing anymore. It's sort of, you've lost anything. Like, and what does that give you?
That's a good question, because these are exactly the terms that Rav Shagar is speaking about when he says what the Rambam is doing. He said that he's trying to find some kind of center between these two poles. I think what he says is that Rambam is careful not to go to the extreme when these concepts will lose their meaning. Because if you don't speak about judgment at all, if you erase the first part of the sentence here, of the picture that we described here, then you're losing any meaning. You can't even talk about justice. You can't even talk about averot and mitzvot and rasha tzaddik. What Rav Shagar is trying to show here, maybe something that we'll speak more specifically in the end of the shiur, is trying to show that Rambam is speaking in two different languages, and only this kind of twofold language is needed to create the effect that he wants. Because if you go only to the side of En Shoklim, and we can't understand what Rav Shagar calls the agnostic side, the side that we don't understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so we might, the result may be that we lose any concept of din, of judgment, any concept of justice in the world, and maybe we get to a place of more, looking for the word for adishut. Indifference, yes, thank you. If you assume right ahead that there is no way you can understand what is going on in the world, that Hashem is leading the world, but there is no even a beginning of a language to speak about it, then you might get to maybe some kind of indifference, and you stop asking the questions. And I think what Rav Shagar is trying to show, that Rambam is speaking two different languages in contradicting languages, because he wants to put it somewhere in the middle. This is the picture that we will show in other aspects as well in the next few minutes. But yes, exactly. The question here is, how can you use a religious language without going to these two extremes? Between the extreme of the meaningless language that we get, maybe if I use the terms that we used in the last shiur from Rosenzweig, and he speaks about theology on the one hand and human existence in the other hand. If you take the religious language, the theology, as something that is totally disconnected from human existence, then it becomes meaningless. It becomes only terms that you use, but you have nothing to do with them. You have no way to understand them, to connect to them. But if you are only in the human domains, then you're losing something that this religious language gives you, We'll see this in other aspects in the next discussions here in the Rambam. But thank you for this question. We'll come back to this. Yes, anything else before we go on? Okay, so second question is about the relation between judgment and death. Here we have, in the beginning of Al-Chabet, we have this sentence that we said, Adam she'avonotav merubim al zechuyatav miyad hu met berisho. Here, death is punishment. Okay, this is the description that we know from the Gemara. In Rosh HaShanah, Yom Kippur, we are sentenced to life or to death, as we say in the Tefillah in many places. So this is the beginning of Al-Chabet. Also the end of Al-Chagimel. מי שנמצא רשע נחתם למיתה, מי שנמצא צדיק נחתם לחיים. This is one description where death is a penalty or a verdict of the judgment. But we have in the beginning, or in the middle of הלכה ג' we have this sentence, כשם ששוקלים זכויות אדם ועוונותיו בשעת מיתתו, כך בכל שנה ושנה שוקלים עוונות כל אחד ואחד מבאי העולם עם זכויותיו ביום טוב של ראש השנה. So here, like, without putting an emphasis in it, Rambam describes that someone might die not as a punishment, but like a mundane fact. When somebody dies, there is a judgment that goes on after he dies. So we have death here. It's not exactly a contradiction, but like death appears here in two different contexts. One as a punishment, and one as an occasion that judgment comes after him. Judgment is not before he dies, but after he dies. So then this is not exactly what Rav Shagar says. It's not a contradiction that we can find a way to get over this contradiction. But if we look at this question generally in Rambam's worldview, then I think it becomes more interesting. Because you can see in Rambam, not only in Moreh Nevuchim, but also in Mishneh Torah, that Rambam doesn't think about death as a penalty, as a verdict. He thinks about death as a natural phenomenon, something that happens maybe even for arbitrary reasons. In hilchot Elul, he says that it's not wise, it's silly to mourn too much about someone who died, because this is just the kosher olam. We are material creatures. Material creatures have to die sometimes. They don't think about death as something that is beyond, something that is a result of the way you behave. It's something as a result of the situation, the human existence. So if you think about it in this manner, I think you see that this contradiction here is like two ways to look about death. Is death an arbitrary, natural fact, or death is something that has religious meaning, something that is Hashem verdicts you to die, life or death. And moreover, if we look at another few halachot that Rav Shagar quotes in his essay, and I brought them here under this halachot that we read. In other places in hilchot teshuva, it's interesting to see that Rambam speaks about death in many occasions. And here are a few examples. I'm not sure if it's not all of them even. In פרק ב' he writes, אפילו עבר כל ימיו ועשה תשובה ביום מיתתו ומת בתשובתו, כל עוונותיו נמחלים. So you may sin all your days, but if you do teshuva in the way that you die and die out of teshuva, met b'tshuvato, this is a term that Rambam repeats in a few places. Kol avanotav nimchalim, your sins are erased, and you die out of teshuva. This is madrigal that Rambam stresses. In other place he says, "V'met dvarim amurim shekol echad me'elu en lo chelek olam haba." This is the end of chapter 3. He has a list of people who are en lהם חלק לעולם הבא, no part for the world to come, כשמת בלא תשובה. אבל אם שב מרשעו ומת, והוא בעל תשובה, ומת והוא בעל תשובה, הרי זה מבני עולם הבא. So again, if you are one of those who have no חלק לעולם הבא, if you do תשובה in the end of your life, you die out of תשובה, you will have an עולם הבא. Another one from chapter 7, הואיל ורשות כל אדם נתונה לו, כמו שבאנו, meaning men have free choice to change his life, ישתדל האדם לעשות תשובה ולנעור כפיו מחטאיו, כדי שימות והוא בעל תשובה, כדי שיזכה לחיי העולם הבא. לעולם יראה האדם את עצמו כאילו הוא נוטה למות, ושמא ימות בשעתו ונמצא עומד בחטאיו, לפיכך ישוב מחטאיו מיד, ולא יאמר כשאזקין אשוב, שמא ימות קודם שיזקין. So again we see this repeatedly. Rambam says that someone has to do tshuva before he dies, and this can change his whole figure, it can change his fate in Olam Haba. And in the last halakha that we read, it's something that you have to think about it all the time. You might die every day, so you have to do teshuva every day because it can come to you in any minute. So here also we see that Rambam is not talking about death as a punishment, but it's something that happens. It may happen every day. The important thing is not to do teshuva to prevent you from dying. It's not like if you read halachot Aleph and Bet here, so you see death as a punishment, and you say, if I will do teshuva, if I will be a good person, then I will not die. I will be sentenced to life. But in other places, and also here in this chapter, Rambam is speaking about death as something that happens. It should happen anytime, and you should be prepared. So teshuva is not preventing death, but it's maybe preparing you to your death. And the main term that Rav Shagar stresses here is yamut v'ubal teshuva, to die out of teshuva. This is some kind of a merit or something that you should aspire to, a goal, to die as a Baal Tshuva. And again, we see that Tshuva is not something that goes against that, but something that prepares you to your death. Also, what we said, judgment after you die, judgment before you die. So this is another interesting contradiction that Rav Shagar sees here. Specifically, it's interesting when you see that death takes a central place in hilchot teshuva for the Rambam, and it takes two different places. So the question is death a religious matter or death is natural matter? Or how do you think about this opportunity, this situation of the possibility that death can occur in every day? How do you think about the judgment in Rosh HaShanah? Do we think that we are judged to life or death in Rosh HaShanah? Or do we think about death as something that might happen every day? That our teshuva is aimed at preparing to this situation. So this is a second contradiction. And there's an open question here. What is the relation between death and teshuva or the finitude of life? We can put it this way, according to the Rambam. This is the second one. Okay, now in another one, last contradiction, maybe not a contradiction, but more like a tension in this halachot that we read, relates to the question of when is the judgment happening? Because we have two descriptions. We have the judgment of the person after he dies, we saw now. And we also have, related to this, we have the description of, here in Atchala, beginning of Halakha Daled, Rav Shagar, when Rambam speaks about תקיעת שופר, קיצו משנתכם, חפשו מעשיכם, he says, לפיכך צריך כל אדם שיראה עצמו כל השנה כולה כאילו חציו זכאי וחציו חייב. Meaning, Rambam here stops talking about Rosh HaShanah and speaks about the awareness that we should live all the year, every day. When are we standing to judge? When are we preparing for judgment? There is a consciousness that we should cling to all the Shana, all the year. כל השנה כולה. And there is, מפני עניין זה, נהגו כל בית ישראל להרבות ולתקוע מעשים טובים, לעשות במצוות מראש השנה ועד יום הכיפורים. We have these two poles of what Rambam is talking about. Is he talking about how we should live all our life, or is he talking about how we should live Rosh HaShanah, Elul? Is the judgment something that can happen every day, or something that happens in a specific day in the year? Again, this is not really a contradiction. We can say there are two kinds of judgment. We can put these things together in many ways, but what we can see here is maybe the question that arises from here: if there is judgment after the person dies, if you have to do teshuva every day, what is the meaning of putting a specific time in the year for thinking about Hashem's judgment, thinking about teshuva, preparing for the judgment? What is the meaning of this specificity? Maybe even choosing this arbitrary day of Rosh HaShanah for Hashem's judgment. Why do we need to have a specific day where the judgment is? When we look at Halakha Daled, we see that it's moving from Rosh HaShanah because it speaks about Tkiat Shofar. And then it says this kind of awareness that Tkiat Shofar is trying to awaken us is relevant for all the year. לפיכך צריך שיראה עצמו כל השנה. מפני זה נהגו לעשות מצוות בראש השנה. So it moves between Rosh HaShanah to Kol HaShanah, back to Rosh HaShanah. What is Rambam trying to do here? Why? And maybe we can add another question, not specifically from the text, but because I think when you see this contradiction, this movement between these two poles, we can ask again, what is the meaning of choosing a specific day? Why do we need a specific day that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is judging all of us in this day? What is the meaning of picking out how does the Rambam get things about this specificity of the arbitrariness of choosing Rosh HaShanah as the day of judgment for everyone. So we have to conclude yourself until now. Three types of questions about the judgment. Is it understandable or is it el deot? We can't understand it. Can we understand Hashem's justice in the world? Second question, what is the relation between judgment and death? And third, what is the meaning of Rosh HaShanah, comparing to the judgment that can happen every day after a person dies? Specifically, Rambam in another chapter in hilchot teshuva says that anybody should have to do teshuva every day. So what is the meaning of the specificity of Rosh HaShanah? So before we go to Rav Shagar and the answers he said, maybe we try to conclude, as we said, that it's a very common phenomenon in the Rambam that he speaks in two languages, and generally many times there is this tension between a more religious, traditional, maybe even naive voice and a more philosophical, critical or realistic voice, something we can see in different discussions in the Rambam, also generally between Moreh Nevuchim and Mishneh Torah. And what Rav Shagar is trying to say when he speaks about this contradiction in different contexts is what he's trying to show, as I said, is that Rambam speaks in two different voices because he believes that this is the only way you can express faith. I mean, faith is something you can approach directly. You can't describe in a simple language. There is like an inherent contradiction. There's something you can see also in different discussions of the Moreh Nevuchim that he says in the preface to Moreh Nevuchim that there are contradictions in this book for different reasons. And one of the reasons is that there are things you can't say directly. You have to say two contradictory claims, and the truth emerges from the tension between them. This is how Rav Shagar is reading this, and he takes this as a key to understand the way Rambam speaks in other concepts also, onto context also in Mishneh Torah. So when he sees this kind of contradiction, he's trying to think what is created from this tension. What is the Rambam saying? What is the result of this duality in the Rambam's writing? And this is takes us to the question that we're dealing in this shiurim, because what Rav Shagar is assuming, and assumes that the Rambam thinks also, that religious language can't be a simple language. It can't be something that can be said simply straight ahead, maybe like we wanted to, because it has to be something that on one side connects to our world that is understandable for us, on the other side something that holds something which is impossible to understand, an infinite pole maybe, and the agnostic side that he's speaking about here. So related to what we spoke in the last shiur, we stressed mainly the side of the translation, and the way, the need to take religious language and bring it under the table, like we said, bring it to our experience in the secular world. What we see here, and we see more deeply when we go to the answers that Rav Shagar gives, is that there is need of something more careful, something maybe a more dialectic speak that takes the religious language, takes it out of its comfort zone, out of its simple understanding, but doesn't give up on it. Meaning, religious language to have some tension between what it says and what it doesn't say. What it says and the way it says it is something that Rav Shagar thinks about faith in general. We see it in the paragraph that we'll read in a minute, that maybe the religious stance is somewhere between the finitude and the infinity, something that stands between our religious experience of the world and what we can't understand, what goes beyond our experience. This is like a title of the direction that Rav Shagar will be taking us, and we'll try to explain why the Rambam writes in this kind of way, what is the meaning of all these contradictions. So before we go in, we'll stop for questions, comments. You are invited to open your microphones one at a time. Yes, I'd like to hear you.
If I could ask a question, Pesach Somer. I guess I'm just wondering what I mean, I know you're spelling out that there's this kind of tension in the middle between kind of not being able to say anything and being able to say something simple. But in the Moreh Nevuchim, I mean, he basically says you can't say anything.
Yes.
Right? I mean, in terms of, that all we know is what Hashem is not. So I guess I'm just curious to hear what, how Rav Shagar maybe incorporates that or what he thinks about. I mean, that's the third pole. I mean, that's saying it's really not just two poles. It's not either religious language or, right, I guess they're saying nothing. Well, I guess, so it's two poles, but I guess, like, what is he, I guess, what would he say about that other extreme?
He puts in specifically what you said about Moreh Nevuchim, about Rash Lila. I'm not sure what's the English term for this, but he thinks that in Moreh Nevuchim you have this contradiction also.
It's negative theology.
Yes, so you have negative theology on the one side, and Rambam says that you can't understand anything about Hashem, you only can negate descriptions that you say. But on the other side, what Rav Shagar puts as a second pole in Moreh Nevuchim is where the Rambam is speaking about Hashem as wisdom, as chokhmah, when he speaks about Hashem as an entity that thinks about itself. There are places about Achdut Sechel, Maskil, and Muskal. There's this chapter when he speaks about the unity of Hashem as a consciousness that thinks about itself. We can't go into Moreh Nevuchim, and I hope that in a few years we'll have Rav Shagar's shiur on Moreh Nevuchim, because there is many material there which is very interesting. But in this context, specifically in this chapter, he says that this contradiction, that maybe this is the basic that's the word. The basic phrasing of this contradiction is in this question: do you think about Hashem as chokhmah, as wisdom, or do you think about him as something that you can't understand, in negative theology? This maybe, I think from there, Rav Shagar took this kind of method that he uses even in Mishneh Torah, because it says in Moreh Nevuchim, Rambam says that he's going to say contradictions, to use contradiction, to say contradiction claims. Maybe this is the most basic. How do you approach to thinking about Hashem as something which is ununderstandable, or something that you can relate, maybe even come to some kind of unity when you are going through your wisdom. So we can go into this, but this is, I think, maybe the basic pattern of what Rav Shagar is approaching the Rambam to. And here, I can also point you to other places, even in other halachic discussions, he used these terms. In his book, Zot Briti, when he speaks about the Rambam approach to Giyur, he says that the way Rambam thinks about Giyur is also have these two contradictory poles. It's very interesting to see. I once started in Yeshivat Siach a long series of shiurim of Rav Shagar as a Rambamist, someone who is following the Rambam in very different contexts, and always in the same pattern of contradictory claims and something that you can't express which comes out of them. Yes, more questions, comments?
Regarding this idea about tension with language, I mean, you go with these two poles, like the extremely simple pole and maybe the more philosophical. I mean, and that creates this middle ground, this tension, almost like in Hegelian style. But is there a way of writing, more nuanced? And then, I mean, obviously you can't pick up on all the details, and you could have some mystery within the language, but you don't need to write necessarily in these two opposing poles and just sort of, oh, well, the tension will just solve the tension how you will. I mean, there are also middle ways to write and other ways, other styles. Like, is there something special about this type of thinking, this type of style where you want the tensions, without really trying to make your way through the weeds or the difficulties?
I'm not sure if I understand what you're asking. I don't think Rav Shagar thinks this is the only way. And specifically, I don't think Rav Shagar is writing like the Rambam in contradictory terms. I think what he is doing is maybe the distinction in his writing is between the terms that he uses and the way he uses them. And this is maybe the lesson that I want to take from this shiur, because the question I think for us is when we are using this kind of religious language, specifically about Elul, the question maybe to go beyond the question we believe the validity of these claims or not, to the question of how do we use them, what are we trying to do when we use these terms. And so the question is not, I think in everyday language, I'm not using contradictory claim like Rambam does in his writing. I think what I'm doing, and in general, I think what Rav Shagar will try to claim about Rambam is not far from what we do in everyday use in religious language. We say things that we don't mean simply. And sometimes this is what I want to get through Rav Shagar, what is this kind of speak? Because sometimes it makes us feel that we are lying, that we are not honest, that we are using terms that we can't stand behind, if you can say that. And how to use language in a way that does something different than its simple meaning. This is something that Rav Shagar is taking from the Rambam, not specifically in the way of talking contradictions, but also in the way of saying something in a specific manner, not in a simple manner. That this awareness that religious language is not supposed to be taken literally in many cases, not because it's trying to avoid some contradiction, but because it deals with complicated manners, because it tries to take us out of our world without losing the meaning, like we said before. But maybe we can understand this more when we go to what Rav Shagar is doing about Rambam. So any last comment before we go in? Okay, so we had 3 questions. I will try to speak about 3 answers or explanations, maybe, what Rav Shagar is doing with these 3 subjects. The calculation of Avarot and Mitzvot, the meaning of death and judgment, and Rosh HaShanah. So we'll start with what Rav Shagar is saying about the 5th question here in this page. So after asking the questions that we talked about, he's saying this, מסקנה ברורה. המשמעות האמיתית של הדיון איננה בעצם התיאור של הדין, אלא בהשלכות הקיומיות שתיאור זה מעורר. החובה לשוב בתשובה איננה תוצאה של הדין, אלא שהדין נוצר כדי לכונן את תודעת התשובה. היא התודעה הנכונה והמקורית של חיי האדם. היא משקפת מצב קיומי אותנטי של החי המוטה לליבו. תפקידו לעורר את האדם משנתו. רצונו של הרמב"ם הוא שהאדם יחיה במתח עצום וגורלי שיביא אותו לרטט שונה של הוויה, ולחידוד אחריותו ותחושת חייו. למעשה, לא התיאור האנתרופומורפי הוא החשוב, אלא המסקנה דתית קיומית שהראשון נועד לכונן אותה. So what Rav Shagar says here, I think if I could try to paraphrase it without trying to follow his maybe poetic language, is some kind of maybe reading the Rambam upside down, I think, in a way, something that he does in other occasions, meaning if you read the Rambam literally, then he says there is judgment and it works this way, and so the conclusion is, like in the structure of this halachot, what Rav Shagar is showing, that it starts from the description of the judgments, and this halachot leads to what he says in halakha daled, לפיכך, צריך כל אדם שיראה את עצמו כל השנה כולה. Meaning there is a description of the judgment, and there is what Rav Shagar sees an existential outcome of this descriptions. And Rav Shagar is reading this backwards because he says what's important for the Rambam is not the validity of this description. Is there a judgment that works in this way? How can I understand the judgment of calculation of Averot and Mitzvot? The purpose is the lefichach, the way we understand, the way we, the awareness that this description creates. This is what he means, what he sees as some kind of ethical guidance of what kind of tension, what kind of drama we have to live our life, and not only in Rosh HaShanah, we said that all the year. So the structure of this halachot, as Rav Shagar sees it, is answer for the contradiction between the anthropomorphic, the simplistic description of the judgment, and I think what Rav Shagar assumes is that this philosophical comment that you can't understand judgment is more coherent with what Rambam thinks in other places. So he assumes that when he describes the judgment in a simplistic way, he's not trying to describe what is really happening in the higher worlds, as we spoke in last year about the higher worlds in our world. He's trying to create some kind of consciousness. And this is the structure of this halachot that leading to the lefichach, meaning beginning with a description that it looks like something that describes simply what's going on in Rosh HaShanah, how this judgment works. But as what Rav Shagar sees in Rambam, that he wrote this comment of you can't understand the judgment, what Rav Shagar takes here, that it's not important for him exactly what happens in the heavens. What's important for him is how we will live our lives. So this halachot leads to the conclusion of it's meant to create some kind of tension. Rav Shagar here describes very poetically. רטט שונה של הוויה, I will not try to translate it, but he wants us to live in a specific tension, and the anthropomorphic description, the simplistic descriptions is meant to create this kind of tension that you can't arrive at if you take things too generally, too abstractly, without this thought about that everything you do matters, that everything counts. So these kinds of descriptions are meant not to describe objectively what is going on, but meant to create some kind of awareness. And this is another evidence that Rav Shagar brings to this interpretation, that if you go to the next halachot in this chapter that we didn't brought here, you see that the Rambam proceeds to speaking about judgment, but there are all kinds of claims there that are, maybe you can say, that might have weakened this kind of tension, because the Rambam says in the next halachot that Hashem doesn't punish you for the first thing you did or the second, but only on the third, following the Gemara. And also he says that even the evil people from Ifna Rishayim, Yeshai Israel, Yesh Lahem Chelek L'Olam Haba. So what Rav Shagar sees is that before he says all these things that he takes from the Gemara, he wants to create these tensions, because he wants to create this picture without this kind of maybe hakalot. And to create this tension that everyone should see himself like every act that he does counts, makes him Rasha, make him Tzaddik. This is what these 4 halachot are building. And this is more important for the Rambam, this existential standpoint, than what is the content of these descriptions. If we'll go and read the next 2 paragraphs from Rav Shagar, he proceeded and said, בכך נבין את התוספת של הרמב"ם בהלכה ב', תוספת חסרת מקור. ימין זה לפיכך חייב אדם שיראה את עצמו כל השנה, שגם לפי תוכנה ומונחיה אינה רמב"מיסטית מובהקת. הערה זו משתלבת במאמץ של הרמב"ם לכינון המתח המתמיד והטוטלי שראוי לאדם לחיות בהשראתו, ולהעצמת הרצון לחיות במתח הגורלי של ההליכה על החבל הדק. לעולם אינך יכול לדעת את מצבך, ולכן אינך יכול לנוח על זרי דפנה. מצטרף איתי לקביעה שלפי האדם צריך לראות את עצמו ואת העולם כחציו זכה וחציו חייו. על אף התיאור הפרטני של רוב העבירות ורוב מצוות, הקודם להלכה זו, קובע הרמב"ם עמדה אגנוסטית. אי אפשר לו לאדם לדעת את מצבו הממשי. מתוך הדברים מלמד שרק ההצגה האנתרופומורפית הנאיבית, בצירוף ההסתייגות הפילוסופית, יכולים לכונן את המצב הקיומי של הדין. רק זאת תציל אותו מהגשמה ותעניק לו את המחץ של הגורליות של הדין והאחריות שאליה שואף הרמב"ם. זוהי גם השלכה קיומית של העיקרון שלו, חכם ולא בחוכמה. רק דרך הסתירה והפרדוקס יכולה להתכונן לעמדה הדתית. תפקיד השלילה הוא להרחיב, spiritualize, את המושג הדתי ולמנוע את גלישתו להגשמה, שהשלכותיה הקיומיות הינן צורות שונות של חטטנות מוסרית. So again, without going into every detail of what Rav Shagar is saying here, what he shows us is an example of the need in these 2 contradictory poles that we described. You have to have, on the one hand, specific and description of the judgment, which is every act that you do is counted, is listed, and there is a calculation, and everything that you do might be the one that will change the verdict. This is the anthropomorphic side. But you also have the other side, the philosophic side, the skeptical side, the critical side, that says that you can't really know the calculation. This side is needed specifically to create this tension, because if you think you understand Hashem's judgment, so you might feel safe. You might say, okay, I'm not that evil. I've had a few sins, but I also made a lot of mitzvot. And if I make this calculation, I might arrive at the conclusion that I'm okay, I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm not a Rasha. Maybe I'm Benoni, and I'll make a few mitzvot, and I'm okay. But Rambam wants us to be in these tensions when he says you have to see yourself as someone who is exactly in the middle, which every act that he does, good or bad, will take him to this one side of this equilibrium. Then this is something you can create if you think you can understand the judgment. On the one hand. On the other hand, if you think there is no ability to understand what is mitzvah and what is avera and how does this judgment work, so also this tension will lose its power. So you have to use these 2 contradictory descriptions: the one that you think you can understand and one that says you can't understand all the way. So you are stuck somewhere in the middle, and this middle is exactly where the Rambam wants to put you. And this is what Rav Shagar reads in the structure of this halachot, that there are two contradictory descriptions that lead to this existential description how your awareness should be. So if we ask the simple question, what Rambam believes, how is the judgment going? Is there a scale in the sky, in the heavens, in Rosh HaShanah, and they are counting our averot and mitzvot? And I think what Rav Shagar is trying to tell us, Rambam is not interested in the description of what happens in heaven. So he's interested in the way these descriptions can shape our existence, our awareness. So when this is the case, you can use two contradiction descriptions to put that somewhere in the middle, because this is exactly where the Rambam wants to put you. And you have to have this tension between this religious, simplistic language and the philosophical, critical worldview that takes you, maybe keeps you from feeling too secure in your religiosity, feeling that you know what Hashem wants from you and think that you are okay with Him, because this is also a mistake for what Rambam wants you to be, with the way he wants you to live. So generally, I think we can see here something that we saw, if you remember, at the end of the last shiur, I brought one sentence from Rav Shagar essay called Al Chidalon, when he said that the central issue in religious language is not the question of God, but the question of man. And I think this is what he sees here in the Rambam. It's not the question of what's going on in heaven, it's the question of how are you going to live your life. And the descriptions of what's going on in the sky in Rosh HaShanah are only a way to construct your everyday awareness all around the year. So this is, I think, an example of how Rav Shagar reads this center of this this third situation that Rambam wants to put you, but he can't put you directly there. He has to use two different languages, one that gives you an understanding, it gives you concepts of good and bad, of averot and mitzvot, and one that takes you out of your comfort zone, draws you to this agnostic side of not understanding what is the judge and what is your situation. So you're put somewhere in the middle, exactly in this place where you think that everything that you do might change your fate. So this is, I think, some kind of explanation of this first contradiction that we spoke about. Question, comments before we go on. Is this understandable? Is this clear? Is this, you think it's a possible reading of the Rambam? I'd like to hear your opinion.
Isn't there a possibility with this type of reading that neither of the poles are satisfying, and then you're not left with this tension? You're just left with, I mean, you're not here, you're not here. So where exactly are you? It's not like he's hitting. The Rambam doesn't say what Rav Shagar says, that you should be in this essential state of constantly, improving. I mean, he could have made such a statement and saying, everyone should constantly try to make themselves better and constantly improve themselves. But he doesn't. He puts you in a state, where saying, well, this is what is, and then he puts you in a state, this is what is, and sort of, I don't know if it necessarily does what Rav Shagar wants it to do, because the Rambam could have said that too.
Say what Rav Shagar is saying, you mean?
Or something like that. He could have, made an argument that people, if he was an existentialist, he could have made an argument that this is the way that you should live your life. You should live your life constantly trying to improve yourself, and that's what's important. It's important to strive to improve yourself. And I mean, which person was he talking to when he spoke in these two languages, and what exactly was his goal? It's something which, I don't know. It's difficult, when you go with these two different. You're speaking to almost two different people when you in these different languages, and then you assume that someone else is going to interpret you, in an existentialist way. That you're trying to create that tension without. I mean, you could have spoke about the tension.
I think Rav Shagar thinks that Halakha Daled is speaking about this tension. But I think he thinks that not only for a simple person reads this text, that if you put this kind of sentence without or everything said before him, I think what he would feel that the kind of existential description is maybe losing something of its, losing the tension, because you have to have strong concepts of good and bad. You have to feel that you're, this taking, meaning I think, using terms like you use, that you should take your life seriously and think about what you choose, we know this description. I think we can also feel that they lose something of the sharpness, and I'm not sure it's the right term, of what the religious language of Averot HaMitzvot gives you. Because it's not something general you should take your life seriously. It's something that goes into details, and this concept of good and bad is becoming more real when you think about it in this terms of there are things which are averot, there are things that are mitzvot, and when you have more averot, you are rasha, you are evil. It's not just are you taking your life seriously or not. There is some specific, I think, a weight that religious language has. But the thing Rav Shagar thinks that Rambam wants to preserve it, even though he's not understanding it simply. He doesn't really think about averot and mitzvot as something that you can calculate, but he still wants you to have averot and mitzvot in your language, in your worldview. Now, in addition, there's also the question of who is the reader. And also, one of the ways to understand the contradiction in Rambam is he's speaking to two different readers. He writes the Mishneh Torah for the religious person, the naive person, whereas Moreh Nevuchim to the complicated philosophical people. I think Rav Shagar usually thinks that although there are different, different awareness or different to people that Rambam is writing for them, different conceptions. Usually, I think he thinks that even the philosophical reader needs the religious language needs these contradictions to shape his worldview. Not just because he wants to preserve tradition and to use traditional language and to quote Chazal, but also because he thinks this holds one important pole for the outcome, for the kind of awareness that he wants to shape. So it's specifically in this time, I think he said that he reads Rambam as someone who is giving these existential descriptions, but puts this after maybe the religious descriptions. It speaks about Averot HaMitzvot as something you can count, because when you put this description on the background of this first three halachot, then you think about the act that might change your world as something very specific. Not as something that maybe you can reinterpret it as good or bad, but also, did you do what you have to do? Did you do mitzvah? Did you do averah? There's something that is more, I think, concrete about it, this kind of descriptions. This is how I understand what Rav Shagar is seeing in this halachot. Yes, more questions, comments? There are things that I want to make more to clarify here. Maybe you can go to the second discussion and see what Rav Shagar is saying about judgment and death. And this also relates to this question that we spoke about here, because maybe my question here is Rav Rambam saying things that he doesn't believe to create this awareness. What is the meaning of using this kind of saying things that you don't stand behind? This is something, as I said, very crucial thing for people like us, inheriting this kind of religious language that many times doesn't match our experience of the world. So a reminder, the question was how Rambam sees the relation between death. Is death a penalty, a verdict for a sinner, or is death a natural fact? And if it is, what is the meaning of lamut mitoch teshuva? What does it mean to die as a bal teshuva? So Rav Shagar writes this: עד עתה הבנו שהאדם צריך לעשות תשובה כדי שלא ימות. וזאת גולת הכותרת של התשובה. This is how you read the first halachot. If you will be tzaddik, then you will not die. כאן מתברר שישנו הישג גבוה יותר, כדי שימות והוא בעל תשובה. This is what we saw in the halachot that we quoted earlier. מה העניין? התשובה ברורה. גורלו של האדם לנצח נקבע לפי מצבו בשעת מיתתו. הרמב"ם סובר שהתשובה אינה מחיקת עבירות, אלא כאמור שינוי פנימי באדם, ודינו של האדם איננו אלא קביעת דרגתו לנצח. כיוון שכך, הרי שמצבו ביום המיטה מקבל חשיבות גורלית. מצבו ביום המיטה הוא עצמו הדין של המיטה. זו גם הסיבה לניסוח שחוזר על עצמו מספר פעמים, שימות והוא בעל תשובה. מגמת הרמב"ם היא לתלות את השכר במצבו הפנימי של האדם, ולא בשום גורם חיצוני. השכר אינו אך ורק תוצאה של עולמו הפנימי. אפשר שלא היה חי עוד שנה, היה משתנה לחלוטין. ישנה מידה רבה של שרירותיות ומקריות בכך שגורלו נקבע דווקא לפי זמן מסוים. I'll stop to paraphrase and read the following paragraph. This is, as I said in the beginning, this is the second chapter about the Rambam in this book. And in the previous chapter, what Rav Shagar is showing that Rambam thinks about teshuva not as something you do to erase your averot, to change your the calculation which but something that you do to change yourself. Meaning, what Rambam is thinking about when he speaks about teshuva is not the central aspect is not your remorse on what you did, but the way you change your behavior from now on, the way you change who you are now. And Rav Shagar stresses that Rambam is speaking about bchira chofshit, about free choice in hilchot teshuva, because he believes that teshuva is your ability to start anew, to maybe even cut off your past. And teshuva is not about dealing with your past, but it's about leaving your past and starting shaping yourself in a different way. And what Rav Shagar says is that Rambam, at least what he writes in Mishneh Torah, he believes that the person has this freedom, has the ability to change himself in the power of his decision. So meaning the judgment of the teshuva, what it does is to change you. It's not to change any kind of, not to change your balance of averot and mitzvot, but to change who you are now in the present. There's also, you can see it in this chapter, but I don't want to dive too deeply in this point. And this reflects in the meaning of the Yom HaMitah, the day when a person dies, because when I'm still alive, I can change myself. Everything that I did, I might do teshuva in this man for the Rambam, but I will be a different person. And what I did in the past will not matter anymore. It won't be part of me because I can create myself anew. This is why also Rav Shagar comments that why Rambam is reminding in this halachot that we read that if a person regrets the mitzvot that he did, they won't count for him, because what matters is who you are now. And if you did mitzvot in the past and now you regret them, so they're not part of your personality now. And this is why the situation of the person in the day that he dies is dramatic, because the way I am now, this is who I am. And the judgment, the din here, you are who you are. The judgment here is who you are now. And when I'm alive, I can change myself. But in the minute that I die, my fate is closed for eternity. We read the next paragraph here and you speak about it more deeply. יום המיתה איננו תאריך שנקבע מראש ליום הדין של האדם, אלא הוא נגזרת פשוטה אימננטית למצבו. הדין איננו למצבו של האדם בשעת מותו, וזהו גורלו הנצחי. קביעה זו מעצימה את המתח של התשובה והדין, מתח שמבטא את הצירוף שבין המקרי, הזמני של מציאות האדם, לבין העובדה של המקריות זה אופי נחרץ, טוטלי ואינסופי. חרדת הדין היא דווקא צירוף זה. זהו אופיו הגורלי והמוחץ. הזמניות מקבלת כאן תוקף נצחי. העובדה שמת דווקא בתאריך מסוים, עובדה מקרית בדרך כלל, היא זו שתקבע לאותו אדם את הנצח. מכאן שהזמניות עצמה מקבלת דחיפות וגורליות של נצח. אי הידיעה איננה נוגעת רק למצבו של האדם כצדיק או רשע, אלא גם לשעת מותו. בהקשר כזה, החיים בצל המוות, הקובעים את הנצח מתוך אי הידיעה של המיטה, עשויים להעניק לחיים משמעות מורכבת. This is, I think, maybe the peak of this essay of Rav Shagar, the way he reads the Rambam, because if we look carefully, what Rav Shagar is saying here is that judgment of Yom HaMitah, the judgment that comes after death, is not something that comes after you die. Because you're dead now, you go to heaven and they are judging you. The simple fact that you're dead, that you can't change anymore, this is a judgment. The moment, the fact of finitude of life, we could say, the fact that you are dead in a specific moment, specific image of you, specific situation of your life, this is the judgment, not because somebody is judging you from outside, but because this is who you are. Because in the moment that you're dead, it closes your ability to change. And I think we saw similar descriptions in the last shiur when Rav Shagar is talking about din as this kind of finitude of the figure that it closes. When it's someone who dies is someone who is now closed, he's not changing anymore. This is what he calls din. Meaning, and I think this is very original and strong reading of Rambam, because taking this concept of judgment and turning it to something that is immanent, it's something that is embedded in the human existence, not something that is projected on us from outside. And so the way Rav Shagar is reading the Rambam, the judgment when a person dies is the simple fact that he's not going to change anymore. So this is who he is. The way you are in the moment that you die is how you will remain for eternity. This is your life. This is who you were. This is what you had a chance to do. What you didn't do, you can't change anymore. What you did is written in your image, in your personality. This is who you are. This is the person that you are. The story is ended. And this is what he calls here, Ofi Nechratz Totali Ve'en Sofi. And what Rav Shagar stresses here is that exactly because Rambam thinks about death as something which is not guided from above. It's something that happens arbitrarily in a specific moment. Maybe there's an accident, maybe it's just because you are getting old. In some specific and arbitrary day, your life is ended, and who you are in this day, this is who you are for eternity. There is no way to change this image. And this coincidence, the connection between the eternity of the closure of this life and the specificity of this moment that it's ended, this is what Rav Shagar sees as the weight of the judgment. This existential situation that we all will die in a specific moment, and this may be something that is totally arbitrary, but this is who we are. It's closed in this moment. Our life is closed, and we have no way to open it anymore. We have no way to change it. This is what Rav Shagar sees is the essence of the judgment in the view of the Rambam, specifically because he doesn't think the way he reads the Rambam is not thinking about death as a penalty. So what I want to stress in this description to our discussion about religious language here is that this is some kind of maybe a philosophical view of Hashem's judgment, that he's for someone who doesn't think about judgment as something that is going on in the higher worlds or in Rosh HaShanah, but something that is embedded in the human existence. And what I want to stress is that Rambam is not speaking about judgment in a simplistic way to create some kind of awareness that he wants to pitch you in. He has this concept of judgment, which is totally real, because what he says here is this is the judgment, and the existential awareness that he wants to put you is not using the religious language to make you act the way he wants. This is the meaning of the judgment for him. So this word, when he says that when you die, you are being judged, you understand it in the way that Rav Shagar is speaking here. And although he uses a language that maybe speaks about judgment that is going on after you die, going on in the higher world, I think what Rav Shagar is trying to say is that the meaning of this religious claim, this anthropomorphic claim, these descriptions of a judgment that is going on in the sky, this is their meaning. It's not just something that he says to educate us, but it's something that has its interpretation in this situation of the judgment in the world, in the moment that somebody dies. So if we spoke about different people, you can read the person who reads the Rambam simply and thinks about this big scale in the sky with Averot and Mitzvot, is not so different from the person that understands the Rambam as Rav Shagar is describing here, that thinks about judgment and something that is imminent in his life. Because Rav Shagar, in the end, what Rambam is saying to both this person is the same. He says what is important is that you think that every moment of your life, you should be trying to shape yourself as someone who is about to stand to be judged, because the moment when you die is totally arbitrary and can come every minute. So this is the conclusion from the simplistic descriptions and from the more immanent description that we read here. They're both putting you in the same position. And the judgment is for the Rambam also very, very real and realistic, and maybe even more realistic. I think this is kind of example for what we spoke about in the last shiur, that taking this religious language and make it something, connecting it to an experience that we can relate to, which is not something that is projected on our life, but is embedded in our situation. So this is maybe the apex of this essay, I think. But its title is Death and Judgment, and Rav Shagar is very busy, as I said, is very interested in what Rambam is talking about this, specifically because he reads it a bit like an existential philosopher that is dealing with this finitude of life. Is this clear? Is this understandable? What are you saying? I'm happy to hear you. We'll have to finish in a few minutes, but maybe comments for this part.
What does Rav Shagar mean, or how do you understand what he means when he speaks about what he says, the words, the kiyam hanitzchi? I mean, what's he talking about, specifically, and what does teshuva mean in such a context? I mean, if you're talking about a person dies and whatever his life is, he can't change it anymore. What exactly does teshuva do? I mean, we could talk about his story. He did have errors his whole life, and then all of a sudden he does this teshuva, and then what? The Rambam talks about this earlier. What exactly is teshuva doing? I mean, how could you have a transformation just based on death coming? But it's sort of like, we'll talk about you and the person who sinned their whole life, and then at the moment before they died, they said a couple things. Maybe they felt bad. They were afraid of death, and then does that actually mean something to in this? Well, now you're this new person, which is a teshuva person. Like what meaning does it have on the picture of a whole life? It's like if you look at maybe like this essential part of you, which is whatever is with you. That part, your soul is what you are now, and that stays. But I mean, if you look at the context of a whole life and a narrative, what you are, it's very difficult to understand what's happening.
I think it's a good question because it touches, I think maybe there is a kind of distance between how Rav Shagar thinks about a person and the way we think about, because what Rav Shagar stresses in the chapter before this, in the essay before this, in Shuvin Nafshi, is exactly that for the Rambam, who you are is who you decide to be. And simply he believes that if you do teshuva in the last moment of your life, although he says that if you do that because you're afraid to die, it's not, I think he said, it's not teshuva me'ula. But still he believes that if you are this strong decision, you can cut away from everything you did in your life. Maybe for someone who's looking from the side, will say, okay, so we did teshuva in the last moment, but we can't forget the narrative of all his life. But I think what Rambam believes is that the person is the place where his decision comes from, his awareness, the place who decides, is the central core of the person, and not maybe what we would think that what you did in your past stays as part of you. This is like a different anthropology. How do you think about a person as the sum of his experiences, or do you think about the person, the core of the person, as his awareness, his free choice? Again, Rav Shagar stresses that Rambam is speaking about free choice in this chapter in hilchot teshuva. He's not speaking about it in some philosophical place, because the way he thinks about teshuva is exactly in this point that the person has a free choice. He can change himself through his decision. So maybe we can argue with this and we can say, I can't really believe that a person can cut away his past. And when you look at his lifetime, when he dies, you have to take into account also the things that he regrets on in his last moment, or maybe before the last moment. But anyway, what Rav Shagar, I think what Rav Shagar is saying here is still stands, because your narrative, even if you take all your experience into account, this kind of story also is closed when a person dies. This is, I think, what's most important for Rav Shagar, because this is what makes death, as even the simple fact of death, as some kind of divine judgment, which closes your image in the way you understand it. Yes, small question, comments before we try to sum everything. Yeah, anybody else? Okay, so we'll try to conclude. We will not speak about the last question that we spoke about Rosh HaShanah, although we said it in passing. About Rosh HaShanah, what Rav Shagar is saying in the last paragraph that we will not read now, he says that specifically that Rosh HaShanah is some kind of a practice for how you should live your life every day. And you can see, again, he shows this from the structure of this halachot in the Rambam. Rosh HaShanah is like a conclusion of how you should live your life, meaning you should live every day as a day of judgment. But because it's hard to do this all the time. So we have this one day, once in a year, when we are putting ourselves into this, we are awakening our awareness. We are trying to, like he reads about shofar, there is some kind of an effort, we're putting an effort to think about our life in this way. But what Rav Shagar stresses in, I think it's an interesting way to approach Rosh HaShanah, that Rosh HaShanah is doing this specifically because it's a totally arbitrary day. It's really nothing special about Rosh HaShanah, which is different from every other day. And specifically because it's not special, it can do something that will create the awareness that will go with us all of the year. Because if I think about Rosh Hashanah as one specific day that Hashem is judging me, then okay, I'm relieved. I've passed this judgment maybe, I did the effort, I put the effort in the Yeshivat Siach Yitzhak in Elul. When it's over, it's over. But Rambam doesn't want us to feel like that. So again, in the same way that he doesn't want us to feel that we know if we are tzaddikim or reshaim. So he stresses Rosh Hashanah as some kind of practice for how you are supposed to live all your life. And for this, we have to approach Rosh Hashanah not as the special day of judgment, but like some an example for a simple day of your life, because in every day you might die, as Rav Shagar and Rambam stresses here, and every day might be your day of judgment. So you have to go to Rosh Hashanah feeling that it's not a special day in a way. Maybe some kind of arbitrary day that was chosen to get you into this kind of awareness that you have to live with every day. So this is about the third. And if we will try to conclude in a few sentences, what I was trying to show here through how Rav Shagar reads the Rambam is some kind of way to use religious language shelo kipshuta. I don't know how to translate this expression, meaning sometimes I think we feel, as I said, that we are saying things specifically maybe when we're in the Siddur or when we're speaking to students or to our children, we are saying things like kind of expressions and terms that we use, that we inherited, and we don't exactly know if we can verify them, if we believe in them. And what Rav Shagar, I think, is trying to teach us is a way to take this reflective, this critical point of view about the religious language. And I think maybe most of the time it brings us to some kind of an ironic way, an ironic speech, and we say something what we don't put all ourselves in it because we have this kind of critical or reflective view about it. And I think Rav Shagar is trying to teach us to bring this irony as a way to speak this religious language. Meaning, when you read Rambam and you say that he's saying things that you can see from other places that he is not accepting you can't say them simply. You understand that he's not using it in a simple way. It's something you can learn from the Rambam, to speak the religious language in a way that tries to create something, not as a description that you are now a metaphysical description of evil and of Rashaim and Tzaddikim and judgment, what happens in Rosh HaShanah. We are trying to create some kind of consciousness. And what Rav Shagar takes from the Rambam is that the religious language has a way to create something that you can create in a simple and realistic language, in a secular language. So you have to have the ability to preserve this language with your critical view of it, to create this kind of middle that can't be said directly. And I think that maybe something that when I prepared this shiur, I thought that maybe we are doing this in many occasions, we are doing it without thinking about it, because we usually speak about Hashgacha. We say that Hashem is judging the world, that everything that happens for a reason, but we're not trying to make this a description of specific parts of reality. We're saying this is like a general statement that is not supposed to lead to a specific scrutiny of reality. And also we say we are praying and we are not checking if this prayer did what it's supposed to do or not. Meaning we usually use religious language as something that is not embedded in the real world. And this kind of distance is something that you can learn how to use, using it through awareness, and not using it, not to create this kind of tension that maybe creates doubt, as we saw in the last year, but it's something that we're using to shape our world in a specific way.